Hello and welcome to this week's Open Mic, dear viewers. My guest for this evening is going to be Mr. James Wakiaga. He is the UNDP resident representative here in Eritrea. And we will be talking about the Human Development Report 2021-2022. And I want to remind you once again, dear viewers, that this is a follow-up of the report that we've talked about with Mr. James last year. Thank you for being here with us, Mr. James. But before we start off, I give you the platform to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Raphael. It's always a pleasure to be in your studio, and as you rightly mentioned, this is yet another time we are having this conversation on the launch of the Human Development Report. So I'm certainly looking forward to have an exchange, to have a conversation, and always a pleasure to be here.
Mr. James, before we get there even, I want to just a short highlights of what activities the UNDP is doing here in Eritrea as it remains to be a partner of choice for more than 25 years now.
Thank you very much, Raphael. UNDP has been in Eritrea since 1992, and then we formalized our existence in 1994. So basically, we've been a partner with the government of the state of Eritrea for the last 25 years, and we remain a partner of choice, working very closely with the government and other development players in this country to promote sustainable development. And therefore, we've had quite a huge spectrum of areas that UNDP is closely partnering with the government, ranging from the area of capacity building, especially in the area of institutions, how we build robust and resilient institutions. We are looking at the area of climate change and basically looking at policies, programs that can help to mitigate the challenge of climate change, looking at area of biodiversity, working closely to support the stalling efforts of the government, especially in the area of afforestation, in the area of soil conservation, as well as investment in water, which, as you know, is again another important resource for the country's development. We also in the area of promoting institutions, particularly institutions of governance, working in the area of justice on areas such as universal periodic review, which Eritrea is participating in, as well as looking at other areas focusing on the promotion of Agenda 2030. And therefore it's also gratifying to note, because of this partnership and cooperation, Eritrea did very well, especially on the MDGs that ended in 2015, particularly being among the first countries that attained the health-related MDGs, and now working closely in the area of Agenda 2030, so that we look at how we can work together, accompany the government on the implementation of the SDGs. And here again, important for viewers to also appreciate the efforts of the government in the formulation and presentation of the recent voluntary national report at the high-level political forum, which was well received, but also the report was very important in terms of articulating areas that the country is making progress towards attainment of the SDGs.
Mr. James, now to get to the main subject for this discussion here at the open mic, let's talk about the Human Development Report.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, Raphael, as you know, the Human Development Report is an independent, analytical, and empirically grounded report that UNDP has been producing since 1990. And therefore, it's been a journey of 32 years of producing this report, and it's one of our flagship reports, but also very important report in terms of assessment of global development that looks at the dimensions of social and economic development for countries. And therefore the Human Development Report provides the index, what you call the Human Development Index, that looks at the dimension of health and health in terms of the life expectancy. It looks at the dimension, the social dimension in terms of education, where it looks at the completion rates and years of schooling. And then finally it also looks at the income dimension. And what's important about the Human Development Report is that it doesn't just look at progress in terms of income, but it looks at social and economic progress that as a society we are making. And so to say that in the last 32 years we've been producing this report, we've been seeing tremendous progress in terms of human progress across the world. However, for the last 2 years, we've also witnessed a decline in Human Development Index. And this decline, of course, can be attributed to the recent COVID-19 pandemic, as well as some of the challenges. Right now we have the Ukraine crisis, and these have had an impact in terms of human progress. And so you find this year we produced the 2021-2022 Human Development Report, which is, of course, focusing on the area of our future, and of course entitled Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, and living in a future of a transforming world, and how lives have become unsettled, particularly because of the recent challenges, principally the COVID-19 pandemic, which has really unsettled lives. But of course the uncertainty, or what we call the uncertain complex, that has also been accentuated by technological upheavals, by the impact of the climate change, also by polarization, as well as issues around inequality. And gender inequality, for instance, is pretty dominant. And these are things that we need to address, because they are beginning to have an impact on human progress. And importantly, the fact that uncertain times, which is being fed by these upheavals, is creating unsettled lives. And so the report is bringing out issues around mental health, particularly with the experience of the COVID-19. And so we are seeing sadness, we are seeing stress levels across the world, But
these challenges are at a global...
It's at the global level, because as the pandemic, for example, had huge impact in terms of how we live. It created a new normal, a normal that we are not used to. And so issues of mental health have come into the forefront. And this has an impact on productivity, as well as having an impact on human development as a whole. And so we need to see how we address this uncertain complex. But this complexity also brings its own advantages in terms of creating but the fact that it's doubling down on human development is also creating unleashing its own force of creativity. And so we are seeing how technology now is taking effect in terms of supporting us on how we deal with this new normal. And so it's not necessarily negative, but it's also helping us to unleash new opportunities in terms of moving the human progress.
So what benchmarks have we specifically used to catalog this progresses that we have made, especially in health, education, and the standard of living, like you've mentioned.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And so what the report brings out, for example, in the area of the human development, we are seeing in the last 2 years, over 90 countries have been affected in terms of a decline of their human development index. In addition to that, about 40 countries, for example, in 2022, already had a decline. And so we are seeing a decline in all the 3 dimensions, the dimension on education, on health, as well as on income. And so this is having an effect in terms of the human progress. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, we look at the technological upheavals, and as much as technology is good, we're also seeing misinformation, across the world. And so how do we deal, with these new issues of misinformation? We are seeing elements of mistrust. Trust as a currency is also being affected in this kind of uncertain complexity. And the report does provide data, for example, where you see less than 30% of the global population, putting premium on trust. And so these are the issues which are being brought forward, in this report. And so in a sense, then how do we address this uncertainty complex? And so we have to look at the issues of investment, and what investments are you looking at? Investments, for example, in the areas around nature-based development to deal with the impacts of the climate change. We are looking at the investments in the area, we are looking at issues around insurance, where we have to invest in social protection to safeguard the most vulnerable, from the impacts of uncertainty. We have to look at issues around building trust, in communities, as well as addressing the issues of inequality. And for me, I think importantly, narrowing the gap on gender inequality and focusing more on women empowerment, as an important currency of development. So again, these are issues which we need to focus more in terms of addressing human development.
Okay, so how do people have access to knowing about where we are now in regards to the Human Development Index or the report?
Yeah, certainly the report is available on our website, and also we try as much to disseminate this. We make sure we also have conversations around the report and making it available. And so it's important that countries basically look at the findings, because it does come out with very robust recommendations. But also the whole idea is to trigger policy debate around some of these issues which had not been uncovered before. And so, for instance, in the case of Eritrea, we've seen between 2002 and 2022 good progress in terms of its Human Development Index, which has appreciated up to 0.492, which is the current value for the index, about 15.5% of appreciation of its human development value. In addition to that, you look at the life expectancy in Eritrea, which is much higher. It has grown by about 7.7 years, over this period, and averaging about 67 years, of life expectancy, which is much higher than the average for the sub-Saharan Africa, and which, in a sense, it does accentuate, the gains the country has made, especially in the area of health, and as I mentioned, the attainment of the health-related MDGs is a testimony of this progress which has been made. There's also progress in the area of education in terms of the completion rates, and still more investment needed in terms of now investing even more on the quality of education. And this is where all countries are now focusing on education, particularly in terms of looking at the quality now. Since most countries have more or less attained the universal attainment in the area of education. Even on health, the country is now moving towards universal health coverage, which is also another very critical component for human progress. And then in the area of income, in terms of looking at building the productive capacities and improving the living standards of the people. So the report is important in that sense, because then it does bring out some of these salient issues that countries need to focus on in terms of programmatic, as well as in the area of the policy support. And then importantly, in the area of the gender equality and women empowerment, because we need to look at both male and female, whether in education or in health, and being able to measure the human progress being attained, across. And again, these are areas which the government of the state of Eritrea is also focusing on. And as UNDP, we've been working very closely with the Ministry of Finance and National Development, and of course other bodies such as the National Union of Eritrean Women, who have been in the forefront in terms of promoting women empowerment, and therefore making sure we do invest in terms of programmatic support, but as well as policy support in some of these areas, so that we are able to meet some of those targets as has been articulated in the Agenda 2030.
Mr. James, you've clearly put it that it will help us to trigger from first finding out where we lack and where we are actually making progress at. And this would lead us to somewhere now. The way forward. What is the way forward?
Yes, and in fact, in 2021-2022 report, basically, in articulating some of these issues that we need to focus on, of course, it does end by saying, where do we move from here? And moving from here basically is then looking at these complexities, that doubling down on human development and then finding solution, and therefore looking at investments that we need to make in the area of technological advancement, the digital divide. How do we narrow that? We have to look at the investments in the area of environmental sustainability, addressing the vagaries of the climate change through adaptive and policies that we can put in place, but also the coping mechanisms. And therefore these are whole area from ecological to biodiversity, as well as areas of water, but importantly also the area of renewable energy. And already as UNDP and other partners across the UN, as well as development partners, are now looking at the area of renewable energy, which I think is a win-win, both in terms of as a mitigation measure, but also as a development instrument with transformative impact, harnessing, on nature, the sun, which we are blessed with, and transforming this into energy, and then having an impact on livelihoods, an impact on women businesses, as we saw when we visited the Areza project, which is one of those very transformative projects, that the government has been able to work on. And so again, this is the direction we need to go. We need to look at investments in basic social services, access to water, universal health coverage, investment in quality education, but also skilling our youth, and women to be able to fully participate in the economy, as drivers of change. And so we look at all these issues and looking at the humanity as agents of change, but of course positive change that is transformative, change that has an impact in terms of human progress. And these are the issues which UNDP and other partners, we work closely with the government, accompanying them in terms of investing in these areas.
Mr. James, my dear viewers, to follow the Human Development Report, as it will show you how much progress we've made and and which areas that we still have some challenges to go forward in. But before I close, I want to give the floor again to Mr. James to give us messages.
Yes, no, thanks, Raphael. I really believe that the kind of partnership we are having is critical, in terms of accompanying the government on some of these priority areas in the area of education, in the area of health, which, as you know, is key for human progress and human development. And then, of course, investment in infrastructure that is key in being catalytic for creating transformative change. And so investment in renewable energy, for instance, which is a priority of the government, is one of those key areas, in terms of accessibility to energy that can have an impact on lives. It can have an impact in terms of boosting productivity, and therefore creating a conducive environment for the country's next phase of industrialization. And therefore I take this opportunity, of course, to commend the government for the efforts it's making in these areas on health, on education, on renewable energy and other areas, and therefore ensuring that what we have is a human-centered development that focus on the people, and as UNDP being available and willing to accompany the government in this journey of improving the lives of the people moving forward and towards the attainment of the Agenda 2030.
Mr. James, thank you so much for your time. Dear viewers, that wraps up this week's session of Open Mic. It is good night from me.
And so it's a pleasure talking to you, Raphael.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.